So this morning we continue our sermon series, Lessons from the Toy Chest, learning things from the most unlikely of places, the toys we played with as children, or some of us still play with as adults. Last week we looked at the magic 8-ball, and who knew that such a simple, unlikely toy could yield such theological riches? But I hope you will agree that it did. So this week we turn to another staple of our childhood, silly putty. Some of you may recall that during World War II there was a severe rubber shortage. The Japanese had taken captive many of the rubber-producing areas in our world, and people were urged to save rubber so that the rubber we did have could be used for things needed in fighting the war. There were also numerous efforts to try to find substitutes for rubber, things that can be used in place of this very scarce commodity. Well, an engineer by the name of James Wright, who worked for General Electric, set about trying to invent a synthetic rubber. And he did this by combining boric acid and silicone oil. And he created something no one had ever seen before. And while it never worked as a substitute for rubber, it ended up providing countless hours of entertainment for generations to come. And like the other toys we'll be looking at in this series, I think that silly putty, the real solid liquid, teaches us some important lessons about how to be Christians in this world and about how to be the church. One of the first lessons I think it teaches us is that we need to be pliable, flexible. Like Paul talked about in that passage from Corinthians, we have to be willing to adapt and adjust so that we can make the good news of the gospel heard in today's rapidly changing world. In order to be bearers of God's great love and grace to others, we have to be willing to, in a sense, repackage, adapt, adjust. To put the gospel, not to water it down, but to put it in language and in forms that will speak to today's younger generations. And again, that's basically what Paul was saying to the church at Corinth and to us in that passage I read a few moments ago. But think about it. We could open up that little lid, take out the mysterious stuff, and make all kinds of things. A snake, a face, a strange creature. Most of them, if you are like me, were not great works of art. But what we learned is that this little lump of weird colored clay-like stuff could, in our hands, become all sorts of things. And I think that if we can do that with sin, just think what God can do with us. If we can fashion things like that with this little lump of funny-feeling stuff, just imagine what could happen in our lives if we allow ourselves to become putty in God's hands. If we place our lives in the hands of our Creator. The prophet Jeremiah reminds us that clay in the hands of the potter can become whatever God envisions. So what dream might God have for us as individual Christians, as the church? And what might truly happen if we allow God the Creator to mold us and make us into that vision? You know, one of the fun things to do with silly putty is to give it a good stretch, right? I remember as a kid trying to see how far I could stretch it, how far it extend, how far I could widen it, broaden it, elongate it, if you will. And while I was doing those things just to have fun, I think God does similar things with us. Not to have fun, but for good. For the good of the kingdom, and also for our own good. God doesn't just create us and then leave us alone. As United Methodists, we believe that God's grace is always at work in our lives, trying to move us toward wholeness and holiness. God expects us as Christians to be stretching and growing, broadening our understanding of how we are to live out our faith in this ever-changing world. We're supposed to be reading Scripture, praying, talking with others to learn more about what God's dreams for us are, but also what God's dreams for all of creation are as well. God, I think, wants to widen our narrow minds, to extend our love of neighbor beyond just those we like. And that might include sometimes stretching our faith as well. So, maybe some of you out there are wondering, why did I choose silly putty instead of some modeling clay or perhaps Play-Doh? I love Play-Doh, right? I love the way it smells. I love the way it feels. And now it comes in colors I could have never imagined it would ever come in. So why not Play-Doh? Well, part of the reason I chose silly putty as the toy of the week was that one of the properties of silly putty that's always fascinated me was its ability to balance. Back in the day, the Dark Ages, silly putty could be shaped into a ball and bounce even higher than the rubber balls we had at the time. Remember, this is in the days before the super balls we have now. But you can take silly putty, roll it in your hands, make it in a ball and bounce it, and it would bounce. I'm not going to do it on the carpet because I'm not sure where it would end up, and I'm not sure how well it would bounce. But it would bounce. And I think that as silly putty Christians, if you will, and silly putty churches, we're called to have that same quality, that ability to bounce back. We all know, you all know, from personal experience, that life sometimes is just flat out hard, difficult. Terrible things happen in our lives, individually, but also collectively. But like silly putty, God helps us bounce back. As Christians, we know the promise of God found in 1 Peter 5:10. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of grace, the one who called you into his eternal glory in Christ Jesus, will himself restore, empower, strengthen, and establish you. So like silly putty, we may get bent out of shape. But when we once again rest in the egg and the shelter of God's arms, we find ourselves restored, refreshed. Now, there's another unique property of silly putty that I guess most of us enjoyed, and I've talked about that already with the kids. And that was the fact that it could copy images. How many of you remember lifting images from the funny papers, especially on Sunday morning when they were in full color? I read somewhere recently that you can no longer lift the colored images because of the changes in ink the newspapers use now. But as you saw with the kids, it can still duplicate the black and white pictures and what fun it is It's interesting to see how many kids go home today and try to make you stop on the way home and buy silly putty, and then go home and try to do that with the funny papers. So, I think as silly putty Christians, as I talk to them about with the kids, we are to carry the very image of God within us. We were created in the image of God, and we were meant to show God to everyone we meet. As we grow closer and closer to God in our walk with Christ, as we press ourselves up against that same likeness, then we reflect clearer and clearer pictures of who God is and who we are meant to be like in Jesus. Another thing, unlike some clays, silly putty can be used again and again and again. Think about it. You can mold it one day, you can stretch it another, you can snap it, break it, shatter it, but it can be broken, but it is seldom destroyed. It can even be left out in the elements to dry out. But because it's slow to dry out, it doesn't. I wonder if silly putty Christians are that resilient when life happens to them. I think if we truly believe in the resurrection as we say we do, if we profess that nothing is impossible with God, if we are genuine in our claim to be an Easter people, then we have to be resilient. We can't give up. We need to always be looking for ways to bounce back, even when life throws us some wicked curves. And I think we must never tire of doing God's work. Yes, as a church, as a Christian community, there will be setbacks. Yes, we may find ourselves being pulled in every direction, twisted, pushed, prodded. But in God's hands, it's all good. In God's hands, we can know healing and wholeness. In God's hands, we can be shaped into something new, something needed to be the church in this moment, in this time, to this generation. But we have to allow ourselves to be changed, to be reshaped, to be stretched and molded. Right? One of the things I'm sure some of you parents remember is that silly putty also sticks to all kinds of surfaces. Wood, metal, glass, lint, pet fur, carpet, human hair. And while that can be a problem at times, I think that's also one of its good qualities. And I think as silly putty Christians, if you will, we have to be willing to find a way to bond with all sorts of others. We have to be willing to easily form relationships with people not like us, people not here, people out there. Again, as we read from the Apostle Paul, we have to be willing to adapt and adjust and find common ground with those around us, even if at first those people may seem very different from us. And a silly putty church welcomes all kinds of people and attaches to them, if you will, and then helps them attach to God. Why? Because we are all beloved children of God, created in God's image. You know, I started by telling you the history of how silly putty came to be. Maybe knowing its story made you think differently about this fun little joy. I wonder if the same isn't also true of people. It seems to me that a silly putty church is one that takes time to learn the stories of those in their community, both inside the church and out. And that a silly, putty church is one that is slow to judge, but quick to listen. So often, we think we know, don't we? We think we know that other person. But usually, we only know in part. We don't know that that single mom is struggling to raise her children because she's been widowed at a far too young age. We don't know that that person we think is high on drugs or alcohol has actually suffered a brain injury of some kind. We don't know that the homeless guy is without a home because he's mentally ill and doesn't have any resources with which to get help. We don't know that this one is beaten every day by his parents, or that that one has a relative that abuses her regularly, or that that one is doing everything possible to provide for the younger brothers and sisters that have basically been left to their care, leaving them forced to grow up far too quickly and oftentimes too poorly. Yet we are so ready to condemn, to put labels on people without knowing their whole story. But silly putty Christians are those who have picked up the likeness of Jesus, the image of God. And the silly putty church welcomes and listens and shares life with the hurting, the lost, the least. Because that's what Jesus did. Instead of science experience gone wrong, a silly toy, perhaps, something that costs less than $2. But the lessons that teach us, priceless. Thanks be to God.